On an all-new Buffy the Vampire Slayer, something's making people's nightmares come true.
We have to stop it.
Or else everyone in Sunnydale's going to be facing their own worst nightmares.
What are you afraid of?
It's the ultimate terror, when nightmares turn deadly.
You can't be free.
I am free because you fear it.
He's too strong. I can't fight him.
An all-new Buffy.
Cause we hunt you down without mercy, hunt you down all nightmare long. Feed us rain upon your face, feed us shift every move we trace.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 1 Episode 10 Nightmares, written by Joss Whedon and David Greenwalt, and directed by Bruce Seth Green, is one of the creepier elements in the show. After a season mostly comprised of loosely connected Monster of the Week episodes, the series finally starts to step up its game and explore the characters as it works towards the finale.
Let's explore the world of our story, shall we?
It starts with Buffy having a dream about her upcoming fight with the Master. She enters the underground church ready to kill him, but he overpowers her.
Well, it could definitely be one of your prophetic dreams.
Joyce wakes her up as she screams in her sleep. Joyce tells Buffy that she was lucky enough to get Buffy's father, Hank, to agree to come pick up Buffy after school the next day, so that they could hang out for the weekend. She talks about this with Willow, revealing her insecurity that her parents' divorce might have been influenced by Buffy's troubles with authority. Willow assures her that Buffy had nothing to do with it, and Buffy agrees, but it is a natural fear. During class, Buffy sees a mysterious little boy, Billy, standing at the door. He apologizes as a classmate, Wendell, opens his book and has a bunch of tarantulas crawl all over him while he screams in horror.
I come bearing spiders.
Beneath the school, in the underground church, the Master lectures the Anointed One on the nature of fear. Personally, I prefer passion, but to each their own, I say. The Master says that people are defined by their fears, and he indicates that as a demon he has an instinctual fear of God, as represented by the cross, and another reminder of the spiritual underpinnings to the show, at least sometimes. He tries to overcome his fear by touching it, which hurts him, but he tries to overcome pain the same way. I don't know, if he can seriously hurt himself that way, it seems like a reasonable fear, a useful fear. What is the point of overcoming pain if he doesn't have to? Is he just bored out of his mind? Hey, somebody bring the Master a Game Boy!
You can sit around here and play video games.
Friday morning, Joyce drops Buffy off at school. Joyce assures Buffy that despite Joyce's bad feelings about Hank, he will make it on time because he adores Buffy. Buffy accepts this. Her fear isn't rational. She knows this, but she's still insecure. Willow talks about the spider incident scaring her. Xander says he's more afraid of Nazis, which is kind of an interesting fear that may indicate he was originally intended to be Jewish and not Willow.
What are you doing for Christmas? Being Jewish.
On the other hand, Nazis may just be appropriate as symbolic shorthand for evil characters. If they had some kind of generic monster, it might create confusion with actual Buffyverse characters, while Nazis can just be understood as bad guys. In any case, Xander is a jerk by ignoring Willow's concerns to talk about Nazis, but Willow calls him out on it, so it's in-universe jerkishness. He also says that he doesn't care because he's confident in Buffy's abilities to defeat whatever mystical cause is behind it, so it's far less jerkish than we've seen of Xander before. Giles suggests that they talk to Wendell. Wendell says that the spider incident was a frequent nightmare of his. All of his pet spiders, killed by a pet sitter's neglect, coming back to take revenge. He's traumatized only because it actually came true. One of Buffy's school-related nightmares then comes true, when Cordelia tells her about a big important test she didn't study for going on right then. All of the other students do well, and Buffy can't even write her name. Billy watches ominously.
This is mighty ominous.
The girl named Laura goes into the basement for a smoke, and then a demonic-looking figure called the Ugly Man beats her with a club arm and calls her Lucky 19. Unlike most Sunnydale victims, she survives the attack, and Giles and Buffy go to the hospital to question her. She shares the Lucky 19 clue. On the way out, the doctor indicates that she's the second of two victims of the same perpetrator. The first is a boy named Billy in a coma. Buffy promises to stop the attacker. If the attack on Laura were featured on its own in a standard horror film, I could see the scene being sexist, capitalizing on violence against women, etc. However, the fact that there's a male victim at the heart of the whole thing, even though he's a bigger character, makes it not sexist in my mind. Having Buffy as the hero, pledging to stand up for them and stop the villain, makes it overtly feminist. At school, there's this male punk trying to look good for his friends by boasting about how he's gonna fight some guy, and then he lives his nightmare of having his mom come in and embarrass him in front of his friends. It's generally considered one of the funnier parts of the episode and such a Joss moment. Feminists laugh at this and then forget about it. Later on, Cordelia lives a nightmare of having a bad hair day, which I consider equally hilarious. Often though, feminists will criticize this as evidence of Joss's misogyny, yada yada. We should care about this girl because we're ultimately made sympathetic for her, etc. If you can laugh at the punk's nightmare though, you don't have the higher ground. The punk might be violent, or so he boasts, but Cordelia is verbally abusive. You might be able to make some general point about humor based on Schadenfreude, but it's not sexist.
Schadenfreude isn't very attractive, Laura, but so satisfying.
Willow and Xander discuss Wendell's story. Willow suggests that his nightmare literally came true, but Xander is more skeptical, until he lives his nightmare of coming to school in his underpants. It's relatively harmless, but then Giles lives his nightmare of being unable to read, so he can't do vital research. Buffy reads a news story for him about Billy being found beaten after his Kitty League game. His uniform number is 19.
19.
Giles suggests that Billy is having a nightmare about his trauma, is astral projecting himself, and as a byproduct, is bringing other people's nightmares to life.
Oh, this is like a nightmare.
Then Hank comes in. He came early to tell Buffy something important. He takes her aside and tells her that she is the real reason that he and Joyce broke up, that he doesn't really love her, and that he wants to stop spending time with her. At this point, it's obvious that this isn't real. Buffy herself knows that it isn't real, but she still has to face it. Like Luke Skywalker facing the facsimile of Darth Vader in the Cave of Evil, she has to face the facsimile of her father telling her that he doesn't love her, as one of many obstacles she has to face as a hero. It's a heartbreaking scene to watch, with Buffy having glorious pathos as part of an overall story about a female hero. When the nightmare passes, Buffy steels herself and goes to work.
Let's mount up.
She finds Billy and talks to him. He doesn't remember what happened after his game. She asks about Lucky 19, and he says that's what the Ugly Man calls him. The Ugly Man shows up and attacks them. Buffy tries to fight him off, but isn't strong enough, and they run. Billy says that there's a constant cycle of him hiding from the Ugly Man, and the Ugly Man finding him and forcing him to run again. Buffy can't fight the Ugly Man, and is just as afraid of him as Billy. The Ugly Man is a projection representing the man who hurt Billy, but as Billy's psychology merges with Buffy's, the Ugly Man also represents the Master, that top villain who Buffy fears she can't defeat. She runs with Billy to find her friends, hoping that her friends would help her defeat the Ugly Man, or the Master. Meanwhile, her friends split up to look for her.
Why does everyone make that mistake?
Willow watches Cordelia with a smile as nerds drag her away to join the chess team. It's kind of the schadenfreude of her leading Cordelia to delete her homework. Willow's not behind this incident, but she can appreciate her tormentor being tormented. If you're fine with Army Man Xander beating up Pirate Larry, despite Larry later being sympathetic, there's no reason to be against this. It's moderately connected to Willow's empowerment arc. Alas, Willow is led off into the basement by a voice calling out to her. She ends up in a nightmare where she has to perform an opera on stage, but has no idea what to do. While kind of just a standard nightmare, it's a good snapshot of where Willow is as a character. A timid nerd, terrified of being put on the spot in social situations with people looking at her, reliant on her friends, and practically helpless without them. Season 4, Episode 22, Restless, will later reference this nightmare to show Willow's overall character development since this point. Meanwhile, Xander wanders into a hall vandalized by Nazis.
You're a Nazi.
Not that we'll actually see any Nazis, just their graffiti.
Big overture. Little show.
The intimidating atmosphere doesn't stop Xander from spontaneously turning stupid and running after a trail of dropped chocolate bars, like a cartoon character. Maybe he wears that Tweety Bird watch because he feels an affinity. The bars lead to an exaggerated version of a clown that terrified Xander at his 6th birthday party.
Who's the birthday girl?
Despite his macho attitude, Xander has not had the best luck with physical confrontations throughout the season, only really being useful in a physical capacity as late as Season 1, Episode 8, I Robot You Jane. So it makes sense that when confronted with a deep personal fear, Xander would run and find his friends. It's comedic, but there is actually a good character point in there. Despite his extreme fear, Xander summons the courage to beat up his nemesis.
Good for him.
Buffy and Billy talk some more. Billy is afraid of missing catches in baseball, Buffy tells him that it takes a lot more than one player losing one catch to lose the game. The ugly man shows up and they run again. They end up in a Sunnydale cemetery at night. There is a freshly dug grave with a coffin. And then the Master shows up. Billy walks off to let her face her own nightmare. Whether this is actually the Master or not is unclear. He says that Buffy's nightmare that he escapes his prison allows him to do it, but the nightmare of Hank also says he's Hank, so it's hard to trust these things. On the other hand, this Master-looking character also seems far more aware of what's going on than Hank. In any case, the Master-looking thing in front of her overpowers her and buries her alive, and then either snaps back to his prison or disappears because he's not really the Master.
Death is your gift.
The nature of being a Slayer is innately linked with death. One dies, another rises. The Slayer's main purpose is to kill, and wonder when a vampire would get lucky and kill her. Buffy's fear is death and what might come after the death. Or as Shakespeare put it, to sleep, and in that sleep of death, what dreams may come.
Death is on your heels, baby, and sooner or later, it's gonna catch you.
The rest of the gang see a tear in space-time leading to the cemetery. They go through it and find Buffy's grave. This is Buffy's nightmare merged with Giles' nightmare of being unable to protect her. Buffy's nightmare phases into it as she rises from the grave as a vampire herself. She's afraid of being corrupted by the very evil that she fights against. The vampire version of Buffy is pretty much just an illusion. Buffy still has a soul and wants to do good. She just has the body of a vampire and the urge to drink blood. She's also apparently stronger, having vampire strength added onto Slayer strength. Though not named as anything other than a vampire in canon, fans sometimes refer to this kind of creature as a slaypire. We'll encounter more of them in the comics. Giles asserts that they must wake up Billy to stop the nightmares, so they run to the hospital as chaos descends on Sunnydale.
No, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Open my eyes! Eyes! Ah! Ah!
Docking to Billy's comatose body doesn't work. Billy's astral form appears and says that he can't wake up. Then the ugly man shows up, and Buffy turns to face him. Though she was once weak, her slaypire form gives her the strength to beat him up. Some people think this is just a little too convenient, that she just happened to be turned into a slaypire as part of her dreams, which just happens to give her the power to defeat the monster of the week. However, you have to think of the episode as foreshadowing to the finale. Buffy is living a prophetic dream with dream symbolism. The fight with the ugly man is about fighting the Master. I'll address this more in my review of Prophecy Girl. After beating the ugly man unconscious, she tells Billy to be strong and lay the finishing blow. He can't hide and has to stand up to the ugly man. Billy stands up to his trauma and symbolically unmasks the ugly man like he's a Scooby-Doo villain.
Would have been mine if it hadn't been to those meddling kids.
And he wakes up, ending the nightmare chaos. This is very similar to Buffy helping Sid kill the demon in Season 1, Episode 9 Puppet Show, but it doesn't have any bad message about death being good and may be empowering to victims of trauma. The Kitty League coach then shows up to visit his lucky 19, and Billy unmasks him as the one who beat him. He stands up to his nightmare, and Xander keeps the coach from running, showing his growing utility to the group. The coach is the first real human villain in the human world that we've encountered. Previously we had Catherine, the abusive mother, but she was also a witch, a supernatural being. And then there was the zookeeper, who was basically human but wanted to turn himself into an evil hyena monster and did, so he is fundamentally supernatural. The coach is neither. He is fundamentally grounded in the human world. The ugly man is a little easier to think about as just an otherworldly monster, and many people find his human counterpart terrifying. Buffy is a standard fantasy hero in defeating the ugly man, and she's a more mundane hero for helping a little boy stand up to his abuser, being an empowering figure for women to imagine themselves as, and an encouraging big sister figure to encourage younger kids to stand up for themselves. She's awesome. Go Buffy. In the aftermath, Willow criticizes Xander for being attracted to Buffy when she has a vampire face. It's a joke about Xander being a shamelessly horny teen boy, and it strikes me as really out of place for a show that has a lot of sexy vampires. It kind of feels like it's shaming fans of sexy Anne Rice-style vampires instead of fearsome Nosferatus, which is a sentiment we'll see again in Season 2, Episode 7, Lie to Me. I don't like it. The real Hank shows up to pick up Buffy, and he is truly delighted to see her. She goes off to spend a fun weekend with her father. In Season 5, Episode 6 Family, the writers decide to drop Hank from the story and retcon him as an awful father who hates his family. But that's not how he's initially written. A lot of people, when they think of Hank, they think of the awful Hank from Season 5, and this impacts how they view him in Seasons 1 and 2, but this is a mistake. Season 1 and 2 Hank must be interpreted on his own terms. And this Hank is a Hank who loves Buffy, who can't wait to hang out with her. Joss Whedon's own parents got divorced, he stayed with his mother, and he got to know a new stepfather when she remarried. He had a good relationship with each of them, and it indicates that he had 3 parents: his mother, his biological father, and his stepfather.
When I created Buffy, I wanted to create a female icon, but I also wanted to be very careful to surround her with men who not only had no problem with the idea of a female leader, but were in fact engaged and even attracted to the idea. That came from my father and stepfather, the men who created this man, who created those men, if you can follow that.
Sometimes a paranoid feminist will speculate that Joss Whedon hates women because of his broken household. Or a paranoid misogynist will speculate that Joss hates men for the same reason. But the truth is that having your parents split up doesn't doom you to a bad childhood and bad relationships with your parents. There's a bad stereotype about families going through divorce and being corrupted by the experience, that they become a broken household, that they can't be a healthy family, that they're fundamentally broken. But that's not the end-all be-all of it. Joss had an okay childhood, and through the show he promotes a positive image to dispel harmful prejudices. Joyce is okay, Hank is okay, Buffy is okay. And so concludes Nightmares. I have no real problems with this episode. I have a few nitpicks over the plot and production, but from a feminist standpoint it's fine. We're now building to the finale, and Buffy is put through the ringer as she approaches her heroic destiny. It's part of an overall plot about Buffy being a hero to defeat the Master and save her friends, and it's nothing but feminist.
Grr, arg.